Hey everybody, we've got a fun video here for you because what we're going to do is paint something retro because a friend of ours sent in this box, Terminator Squad, the old classic one from the days of Rogue Trader. It's dated on the back of the box as 1989 and I can sort of vaguely remember this being on sale in like car boot sales and things like that because it's actually out of production when I first got into the hobby in 97. And this is great, it's really fun, it's great to finally see what these models are like inside the set. And what we thought we'd do is paint it in a real sort of retro style. Now on this channel we've already done a Blood Angel in a classic colour scheme, the second edition version, but for this one we thought instead we'd do an Ultramarine in that really old school style. So this means it's going to be a really bright blue, red gun casings, no gold, instead it's going to be yellow, and also we're going to have those hazard markings on the power fist just so you know it's dangerous. It's going to be a lot of fun, we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you at the desk. To paint our Ultramarines Terminator, I've decided to take a look at the colours of what they were like at the very dawn of 2nd edition, and so that means lots of bright punchy colours here. And so for our Terminator, what we need to do is start out with an undercoat that's going to help out with that, especially with that blue armour. So I've decided to undercoat the miniature using Macragge blue spray from Citadel, and what we're going to do is start out with the blue armour, which actually is a bit different because whilst Macragge blue is the colour for the modern day Ultramarines, back at the time we're looking at they were actually brighter than this with a colour called Ultramarines blue. Now it is actually possible to get this colour from a company called Coat d'Arms, but in this case I'm going to be using some modern Citadel paints because they're easier to get hold of. In this case what I've got is Altdorf Guard Blue, which is the closest approximation of the colour of what they were back in the day. So what we need to do is start out by applying this over the Terminator on that blue armour, and so to do it, go for a good brush that's good at base coating quickly. I'm using a small dry brush here from the Army Painter because this is great for this kind of rough application that we're going to be doing here. Now what we need to do is to get some on the palette as ever, thin down with that touch of water to make sure it's nice and smooth and so we don't clog up any detail. And once you've got that thin down like that, all we've got to do is start blocking in all of the armour that we want to be blue. So at this stage, don't worry about anything else, like the helmet's going to be white later on, all those sorts of details. We just want to make sure we get all that plating that's going to be blue and an even base coat of this colour. So as you can see, it's a little bit translucent, so I will be applying it as 2 thin coats. With that lighter blue base coat now applied to the armour, we're ready to do some shading on it, and for this what we're going to do is apply a wash over the miniature to get that definition. And I don't want to take away too much from the blueness here, so I'm actually going to use a dark blue wash. Drakenhoff Nightshade is the one I'm going to use, but this is a very strong paint which can make it quite murky, so what I'm going to do is just take the edge off it with some Lahmian medium. So what we need to do is create the mix on the palette first of all, and for this I have a monster brush from the Army Painter, so a good large brush for this. And what we need to do is start out by just getting some of that blue on here, and you can see what I mean, it's a very strong, very dark colour this. So what we need to do then is just get some of the medium. So as ever, we're just going to wash the brush to make sure that we don't contaminate it with any colour, and then I want a roughly equal amount of this. So I'm going to go for 2 brushfuls. And by having the medium mixed in with this, what we'll get is the paint drying in a nice smooth fashion, rather than with water, in which case it would go quite dry. So this is going to be a nice result for this sort of thing. So we want to bring it down to around about this kind of consistency here. You see much diluted from what it was. And then with this, all we've got to do is paint it directly over all of that blue armour so it settles in all the recessed details. So, for example, around here, just letting it settle and give those dark little bits of shading in all those nooks and crannies. Now, on some of the flatter panels, it will go a little bit patchy in some areas. It will pull ever so slightly just because of the nature of the wash. But don't worry about that. We'll fix that up soon. Once the mix is completely dry, you can see now I've got some definition on the armour, but it has darkened things down a little bit and it is a little bit murky on some flat panels. So we just need to fix that up now by returning to Altdorf Guard Blue, but this time we're going to layer it onto the armour, so smoothly applying it onto the flat surfaces and avoiding the recesses. So to do this, go for a medium-sized brush. I'm using here a medium layer brush from Citadel, and we're back to this colour, which we once again need to thin down with just that little bit of water, and this time apply it in a much more precise way. So just make sure you don't have loads on your brush and that you've got a good tip on there by just twisting the brush, bringing the bristles together. And then with this, we're looking for those flat panels. So for example, if we look at this leg just here, we're looking at applying it onto the flat of that area, so all the way across here. But when you get to recessed details where there's some more shadow in, so for example, as we get down to his foot just here or to the upper leg just there, what we do is skip past the recess and then carry on again on the other side. So in this case, we'd just be doing a little bit around there, and then skipping past towards the toe area here and just painting the flat of that along there. With that layering done, we're going to leave the blue for the time being and start blocking in some other colours on the miniature. And here we're going to first of all take a look at some parts that are going to be nice and bright, and some of them that are decoration, because some parts here you might think would be gold, but like in these days they're actually yellow instead. So what we're going to do is set up now for some areas that are going to be white and also this bright yellow by painting them with an off-white. Corax white is the colour I'm going to use here, which is great for its coverage, but it can be a little bit thick straight out the pot, so when you're using this, just definitely make sure you thin it down on your palette first of all. Now for this, I'm using my medium layer brush once again, and all we've got to do is just make sure it is thinned down so it's not going to clog up any detail, and we really want to bring it down to around about this sort of point here. And with this, expect to have to apply 2 or 3 thin coats of it. And it is important we get an even finish here so none of the blue shows through when we move on to the yellow later on and starts to turn it greenish. So what we need to do is get loaded up then and start looking for these areas. So to begin with, we want to look for things that are going to be yellow later on. So this kind of chest design that we've got just here, we need to pick out the wing design and the skull in the center. So all this part along here. But also we've got the main body of the power glove, because this is still a power glove at this stage. It's not called a power fist just yet. What we want to do is paint in the main body of it around here. So as neatly as possible, just going up to that blue trim just along there. In addition, of course, we have the helmet, which is going to be a white helmet, as this Terminator is a veteran from the first company. So for this case, what we need to do is just carefully block all this in, being as neat as possible when we get to that blue armour that's surrounding it. Once you have an even finish for the Corax white, the next thing to do is to stain these areas with some colour, and here we need 2, and both of them are contrast paints. So first of all, what we need is Apothecary white, and this is going to be for the white helmet, and then after that we need some Iyanden yellow, and this is going to give us that bright yellow very quickly. But first of all, we need Apothecary white to apply some sticking to that medium layer brush, and with this what we need to do is just get a small amount ready on the palette just to make sure that we don't put on too much at once. You see, having it on here just gives a little bit more control. And with this, we just got to paint it directly over the white of the helmet to give it some shading. So all the way over like this, so it settles in those recesses, and some will settle on the flat areas, but don't worry, we will be coming back to that later on. Once the contrast paint on the helmet is dry, we're then ready to repeat this process, but this time with Iyanden yellow on the parts that are going to be yellow. So for example, the chest design, all we need to do is paint it directly over the top of the white to get that bright punchy yellow. Now on the power glove, it'll probably go a little bit blotchy because the surface is so large and smooth, so don't worry about that for the time being. We will return to it later on once again to neaten that up. With that contrast paint also completely dry, our yellow is now marked in, and once again we'll return to that later on just to neaten it up. But now what we've got to do is a few more base coats, starting out with some red, because guns for the Ultramarines this time, they weren't black, they were actually red, and really bright red too. So here I'm going to be using some Evil Sunz Scarlet. Now to apply it, I'm sticking to that medium layer brush, and this is one of Citadel's layer paint, so it's going to be a little bit translucent putting it on here as a base coat, but it's just a matter of applying it as a few thin coats once again, so 2 or 3 should be fine. As ever, you just need to make sure you thin it down slightly with that water, and then it's just a matter of blocking this area in. There's not much really in the case of this one, it's just kind of this coating here on the storm bolter around this area. So we're looking at blocking in this sort of detail on this side going around here, all up to the top, and there's some more on the other side along here as well. I finished blocking in that red, and so now you can see we've actually got all 3 primary colours on our Space Marine. So really nice and colourful, perfect for the time. And what we need to do now is add a few more base coats, which are all going to be sharing the same wash, which will be a black wash. And there's 3 more to do here. First of all, what we need is a silver, so I'm going to use some Leadbelcher for this, and then a very small amount of bronze, so here I'm going to use some Balthazar gold. And then finally we can base coat some black details, and here I'm going to use some Corvus black. But first of all, what we need is Leadbelcher, and to apply it I'm still going to be using that medium layer brush, but at this stage it's a good idea to have a smaller one on hand for some of the finer details, because now we're looking for anything that we want to be silver, so any sort of mechanical detail, so pipes, the working parts of a storm bolter, things like that. And all we've got to do is start working around the miniature, looking for those parts and blocking them in. So for example, on his bolter just here, looking at all these kind of metal details that are so kind of being surrounded by that casing. So this sort of area around here, just as neatly as possible, looking for all those areas and blocking them in. Once you've found all that silver, the next thing to do is to move on to a bronze. So here I have Balthazar gold, and this is for the shells that appear in the storm bolter. So we're looking at this area just down here. And finally, we just need a little bit of Corvus black, and this is to pick out all the soft joints in the armour, such as around here, and also the underside of the feet as well. And with that, all those joints have been base coated too, and so now we're ready to apply a wash to these new colours that we've just been applying, and this time what we need is a black wash. So for this, I'm going to use some Nuln Oil, and to apply it, I've now got a small layer brush from Citadel for just a little bit more control than what we had in previous stages, because it's important that we keep this just in these new colours, so everything from the red onwards, essentially. So just get a little puddle on your palettes to draw from to make sure we don't have too much, and it's just a matter of looking for these areas and applying this colour over the top of them. So for example, on this bolter, we're looking at going all the way across here so it settles in that recess detail and gives definition, including going over the red, such as just around there, and also we need to paint it on the black of the joints as well. The black wash is completely dry, and before we move on, I just want to quickly point out that I also ran some of it into the eye lenses on the helmet too, just to darken them down, as well as that little vent on the forehead. And with that done, we can now move on to the next stage, which is going to be to start layering some of the colours that we've got on here. And the first of these is going to be the yellow. For this, what we need is some Yriel yellow, and to apply it, I've gone to the medium layer brush, and mainly this is to even out the yellow parts that we've got so far, because we've already got a pretty good yellow on there, but it's a bit blotchy, so this is just going to help fix that up. So we don't need loads, as ever, thin down on the palette, so it's nice and smooth. So just add a touch of water until you get to about this point, and then we just need to block these areas in. So for example, on the power glove, you can see it's a little bit blotchy on there, so what we're going to do is just apply a smooth coat of this over the top just to even that out. And on the chest design, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but this time looking for those raised areas because there's lots of recesses here that we need to avoid. So just approach using the side of your brush, just skimming along to get that yellow on the raised up areas. With that stage done, you can see we now have a much smoother finish to all of that yellow, and so we can move on to doing the same thing on two other areas. Because first of all, we need to return to the helmet, and for the white here, what we're going to do is mix a colour that's a little bit lighter than what we've got already, to bring it closer to a pure white, but not quite at a pure white, so we saw somewhere to go for a highlight. So here we're going to be mixing some matte white from the Army Painter with some Corax white, and once that's done, we can then move on to the red, and for the layer here, what we need to do is return to Evilson Scarlet. But first of all, we need to make that mix, and on the palette, I do already have my matte white just there. I'm just going to introduce some Corax white to it, roughly 50-50. It doesn't have to be exact, but you can see when I put them next to each other how much of a grey that colour is. So by mixing them together, we're just going to push it a little bit closer to a pure white, kind of to around about that sort of point there. So with that mix made, all we're going to do is make sure it's as ever thinned down, because what we want to do here is carefully apply it so that we're going to be avoiding all the recess detail and just applying to the smoother, flatter areas, really. So just make sure you've got that good tip in your brush and that you load it up, and then we just got to look for those areas. So for example, on the helmet, what we're looking to do is to go for areas such as this little bit here on the forehead, but not going quite into the recess of that vent, leaving it just a little bit darker there to retain that definition. Same as we move down to the forehead, we just want to skip past that recess, leaving that slight greyish blue there, and just carry on again on the other side. Now the helmet's a little bit closer to a pure white, we can move on to doing a layer on the gun here because we need to layer the red. And so here we're returning to Evilson Scarlet, and once again we're just looking at applying it on the flatter areas, which is going to be most of it here, just not going quite to the corner where it meets the silver so that we get a little bit of definition between the two colours. And with that, the layering on the gun is complete, and so now we can move on to adding some highlights onto the Terminator. I'm going to start out with that blue armour, and for this we're going to be doing two highlights. First of all, I'm going to use some Calgar blue all around the armour, and then to push it a little bit further in some select areas, we're then going to do a second edge highlight of Fenrisian grey. But first of all, we need some Calgar blue, and to apply it I'm again going to use that small layer brush. And here what we're looking to do is to find all the sharp edges on the armour and essentially follow around them with this colour to help them pop out a little bit more. So we need lots of fine control over it. So what you need to do is, as ever, thin the paint down just a little bit more than normal, and then just make sure it's flowing well from your brush. You can always test on the palette too. Ideally, we want to have it so that we can quite easily paint some fine lines like that. You see it's coming quite well from the brush there, so I'm happy with that, so we can go along there. And with this, what we need to do then is first of all look for any more defined sharper edges, just bearing in mind that because it's an older miniature, often these edges are going to be a little bit soft, but sometimes you get sharper ones, such as on the back of the armour just there. And when you spot those, just approach at about 45 degrees from the flat and just gently skim along with the side of your brush to get the fine highlight running across an area such as along there. But often, as I mentioned with these older models, these edges aren't going to be quite sharp enough to do that, or they're going to be quite hidden away, in which case what we need to do is start using the tip of the brush. So in that case, we just need to move into areas such as around here in the leg and just very carefully look for that edge, and using the tip of the brush, just gently skim along it there like that. Same with these bands kind of going down, just paint downwards in that motion towards yourself, so you're doing this kind of natural sweeping motion. Just looking for that edge, and with the tip of the brush, just gently following along. With that edge highlight now applied to all the blue armour, we're ready to push it just a little bit further with a finer edge highlight of Fenrisian Grey. And rather than doing everywhere with this one, what we're looking for is sharp corners like this kind of one here. We've got these 3 points coming together. What we want to do is very lightly just start grazing this colour along that part, just to make it a little bit lighter on that area, just to help these edges pop out a little bit more. So it's any kind of edge like that, including ones such as the points that we've got on the bottom of the shoulder plates around here, just any sharp point, just very lightly highlight around those. And then with that, the blue parts of the armour are now complete, and we can move on now to highlighting those other 3 main colours that appear in the miniature, starting out with the yellow, for which we need a really bright yellow. So here I'm going to use some Flash Kits yellow. After that, we need to highlight the helmet, and for this we need a pure white. So here I'm going to use some matte white. And then finally, to highlight the red casing on the Stormbolter, what we'll need is some Wild Rider red. But first of all, we need Flash Kits yellow, and to apply it, it's going to be very much the same sort of technique as what we were doing on the blue. So here I'm using that small airbrush once again, and with this just need a small amount with which we can use this to start picking out these sharper edges that appear on the yellow, which is mostly going to be on the design on the chest. So you don't need loads, you just need to get it ready and then start looking for those edges. So for example, the design just here, what we want to do is catch that sharper line towards the top of that wing design. So just very gently run it along there for that bright flash of yellow. Same with the skull in the middle, just across the top of its head, and then just around the eyes and a little bit around where the teeth are as well. And we want to highlight these kind of wing designs, these sort of feathers that we've got really coming down from here. Just looking for that edge that kind of overlaps the part underneath. So we just want to go along there, along there, along there, all the way down. Now when it comes to the power glove, for this we don't need to do very much, just a small little flash of this colour close to where it meets the blue around this sort of area here. So just kind of following it around this sort of area very closely to where it meets the blue. With that yellow completed, we can now move on to finishing off the white. And here we need matte white on its own this time, applied once again as an edge highlight, just picking out all those sharp edges on the helmet. And there we are, the white is complete, and so now I can move on to highlighting the red as well. And for this, what we need is some Wild Rider red, once again applied as an edge highlight to really help this colour pop. And with that applied, we've now highlighted all those really bright colours, and, well, now it really looks like it belongs in 1989 or indeed the early 90s. And as garish as it is, I must admit I actually really like it. It makes me feel really nostalgic, so I'm really happy with this. But we've still got a few more colours to highlight, starting out with some silver. So we now need some Stormhost silver, and then for all the black detail, we need Mechanicus Standard Grey. But first we need that Stormhost silver, and this is going to be the same sort of application for what we've just been doing on those brighter colours. We're looking for all the sharper edges of these details, so just set up the paint ready for that sort of thing. Make sure it's nice and smooth like this, and then we're just looking for those corners of all the silver details, so such as on the Stormbolter here, just looking to edge highlight all the way around these sharp edges. With all that silver highlighted, we're now ready to move on to highlighting the black, such as the undersuit round here, and for this we need Mechanicus Standard Grey, and with this you just need to carefully move in and start picking out those raised parts of the texture. The black is now complete, and so we've highlighted the colours that we got in the miniature so far, but there are still a few other details we need to pick out. And the first of those is going to be that Crux Terminatus and numerous skulls that appear around the miniature. And whilst this would be stone, back in these days, these parts would be painted in kind of a bone colour, so that's what we're going to go for here. And to do it, I'm going to start out with a base coat of Zandri dust and then wash over them with some Seraphim Sepia. But first we need Zandri dust, and to apply it I'm going to stick to that small layer brush for lots of control at this stage, and for this all we're going to do is block these parts in. So it's just a matter of getting that paint ready for it and then looking for these details. Now the most obvious one is the Crux Terminatus on the shoulder plate just here, and so we want to block in the entire thing at this stage with 2 thin coats just to make sure we've got that even finish before moving on. But in addition we're looking for some smaller details too, such as the smaller one that appears on this knee down here, and also any skulls that might be on the miniature except for the one on the chest there, so such as this one that we've got on the belt buckle. With that base coat done, we're then ready to carefully apply a wash of Seraphim Sepia all over these details using that small airbrush again for lots of control. And you can see this stains it with a little bit of yellow, giving it that sort of strange yellowy bone appearance that they used to go for back in the late 80s and early 90s. Once that wash is completely dry, we can then move on to the next stage of painting all that detail, which is going to be first of all to layer it with some Ushabti bone, then highlight it with some Screaming Skull. But for a shabty bone, what we want to do is apply it as a thin layer so some of that yellow shows through. So when you're getting this ready, of course, make sure you thin it down as usual, but just a little bit more than normal. So just a bit more water, mixing there just to make it a bit thin and a bit translucent. And with this, once you've just got a small amount in your brush, it's just a matter of applying it onto those flatter raised surfaces whilst avoiding the recesses. So if we take a look at the top of the Crux Terminators here, we're looking at kind of layering it smoothly over this part. You see thinly so some of that yellow shows through, and following it around there. But then as we get to the recess where it kind of goes to this circle, just skip past the deepest area and just carry on again on the flat before then reaching that next part. And then finally, we're ready to finish off all these details with an edge highlight of Screaming Skull applied as neatly as possible, just following all those sharp edges all the way around. With those markings now fully painted, we can move in for some really small detail, and for this we need to paint in the eyes now. And for here, what we're going to do is start out with a dark red for a base coat, so we're going to use some corn red for this, and then we're just going to pick some out in the middle with a bright orange. So for this, I'm going to use some Troll Slayer orange. But first what we need is that corn red, and then when applying this, it's all a matter of being as neat as possible really, because we just need to pick out the kind of raised up detail of the actual eye lens, so that sort of smooth round shape of it. So really make sure that paint's under control, and then we're just going to be careful as we move in to block this out. So what we need to do is take advantage of that black wash that we put in earlier on, which has outlined it, and basically just paint in towards the middle, so we leave a little bit of that black still showing around the outer edge. So just super carefully like that. With that base coat done, we're now ready to add some Troll Slayer orange, and with this we just need to very carefully move in just to pick out the middle of each lens. And with that, the eyes are complete, and so we can move on to the next small detail, which might be small, but it's actually extremely important, because as we all know, a power glove is a very dangerous object. But the thing is, the enemy might not know this. So what we need to do is to paint some hazard stripes on that power glove now, just to make sure it looks like it's really dangerous and hazardous. So for this, what we need is a pure black, and I'm going to use some matte black from the Army Painter for it. And to apply it, definitely use your small brush. I have my small layer brush from Citadel just here. And with this, what we need to do is make sure it's thinned down, almost inky. So kind of bring it down to this sort of point here, because it's really important that it applies smoothly. We can always do 2 coats if we need to, but it's really important that I have that control to get these lines straight. And to do this, we need to kind of make them horizontal if the fist was lined up that way. So we're looking at kind of having them going across like that. So what we need to do is make sure we angle the model so we're painting downwards towards ourselves in a comfortable fashion to get that line. So sometimes means turning the model quite strangely to kind of this sort of point here, but then just slowly starting to put in your initial guideline like that. So quite thinly to begin with, then gradually start working it out on either side like this. Now, once you're happy with the position of it, after you just built it up a little bit like that, you can see it is sort of translucent, but it's not really an issue because we'll just apply 2 thin coats to get that nice finish to it. But it's just a matter of building it up, and then once you're happy with that rough position of it, just skipping along a little bit, start putting the next one in. So I'm just going to carry on a little bit to around about there and start applying the next one in, again in that downward motion, just slowly building it up. So just neatly, gradually working it out until we're happy with it. And really it's just a matter of doing this all the way around. Now, the good thing about a fist like this is that it's actually quite close to the body on the inside there, meaning that the lines don't have to match up all the way around, because that kind of hides the transition. So use that to your advantage there. But if you do happen to make any mistakes with this bright yellow, what you'll need to do is go back to some Corax white to first of all block out where the mistake was, then go over the top again with Yriel yellow to ensure you get that strong yellow once more. And there we are, we now have the hazard stripes and the power fist, so now next time this Terminator punches someone so hard that they literally explode, no one can say that he didn't warn them first. But with that done, we're now ready to move on to the next thing we're going to do, which is to do the base on the miniature, and the first stage for doing this is to glue some sand onto it. So what I'm going to do is go away now and do that with some PVA glue, and when we come back, we're going to encounter one of the most monumental occasions of any painting video that we've ever done. So we'll see you in a moment. The sand is now completely dry, and so to all of our wonderful viewers, we now have a very special moment for you, because this isn't the first time we've done a retro miniature like this, because we have done a Blood Angel before, and when we got to doing the base of that miniature, we had to make do with some Warboss green, which is very similar to the classic green that was used on models that were painted in the style that we're going for here. But one of the viewers that watched that video took pity on us and got in touch and has donated us a bottle of the real deal. Here it is, everybody, a bottle of Goblin Green. So thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for sending this to us, and now we're going to to finally put it to some good use. Now this paint is a real classic one, and this actually appeared in all miniatures of the time that were, well, on any kind of battlefield. It didn't matter what it was. It could have been a Space Hulk, could be Necromunda. This is how the bases were painted. And for it, what we need to do first of all is soak it into the sand. So you can see it's the good old classic bottle just here. Just need to get some of this green onto the palette and then really heavily thin it down with water so it's very, very runny. So plenty of water, really bringing it down like this. With a good large brush, I'm using my monster brush here from the Army Painter. And with that thinned down, all we need to do is start soaking it into the sand. And you just start dotting it on, just letting it run in like that so it soaks in. And then we just need to give it about 20 minutes to dry. The Goblin Green is now completely dry, but what we need to do now is just add that extra touch of realism to this grassy base that we have here by adding a highlight of yellow. And so what we need here is some Yriel yellow. Now to apply a dry brush on a base like this to pick out the texture, I find using a normal dry brush can be a little bit difficult to control, and it's very easy to catch the feet by accident. So for things like this, what I like to use actually is an older medium-sized brush. And I've got one here, an old regiment brush that I keep for this kind of thing. And what I'm going to do is dry brush with it on that area. Now setting up a brush like this for a normal dry brush is a little bit different, because if you do it in the usual kind of way like that, you'll already split the bristles. So instead, I just hold it sideways like this and just go back and forth on the tissue in this way, because this way we get that paint in the bristles and also remove the excess like a regular dry brush. And with that prepared then, all we've got to do is start applying this onto the sand by just going back and forth very lightly. And you can see this then gives me much more control as I get close to the feet, because I can get into areas like that and just follow the top of that texture. Now, once this is done, all you need to do is paint the rim of the base. And in this case, I'm once again going to be going for some Goblin Green, and then the transfers need to be applied. And once that's done, the Terminator is ready for the battlefields of the far future or the early 90s. And here we have the completed Terminator in his bright blue armour, ready to dazzle his enemies into submission. So as you've seen, a project like this is actually a lot of fun painting a miniature in a retro style, and if it has caught your interest, then what you should do is take a look on the internet for Old Hammer and Middle Hammer, which is essentially retro wargaming, playing an older edition of something like Warhammer, and where possible using the miniatures that are available in the day to do so. Something like this is a lot of fun, it's a great little project to try out, and it's also really fun to try looking for all the miniatures second hand and seeing if you can get those originals. So have fun with it, and we'll see you again very soon.